Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Today's session will be around utilizing the digital protocol. And today we're focusing on complementing the ICH M11 protocol template with the digital schedule of activities. This project is a great project that's bringing together multiple organizations. It is a Vulcan project running under the Vulcan Accelerator from HL7. And partnering in this project, we have both Transcelerate and CDISC. My name is Stacy Teagan. I'm a program director at Transcelerate and also working with Vulcan. If you want to advance to the next slide, we'll go through our agenda for today. First, I want to thank folks for registering for the webinar. We're trying a new approach where we've put some of the background information into a recording you could access via the registration page. Hoping this will help folks continue to stay abreast of the UDP project without having to repeat content, but also welcome newcomers. So for today, we're going to focus on some updated and new information, particularly from the January Connectathon, where the focus was around schedule of activities. And we'll also we'll have a demo as well as some materials, and then we'll talk about what lies ahead for the project. That will be from Hugh Glover from Vulcan and Dave Iberson-Hurst from CDISC. And then we'll turn to Lynn Mercado to help us think through some of the business process opportunities and impacts. We will spend some time doing some Q&A, so folks, you should feel free to think of questions for our presenters, and we have a couple polling questions as well. Go to the next slide. Just a few logistics for today's webinar. This is a listen-only webinar, but you can please put your questions into the questions panel here. And that will allow us to bring those questions up for our panelists. And there is also a handout that you can access via that button at the top right, which has some resources for you to take away. Next slide. Just a few ground rules for today to be mindful of things we can and cannot discuss. We do want to make this focused on the solutions that are being created, and of course, like how do you bring those solutions back into your organizations. But all of this is really voluntary. Compliance is on the part of those who are executing protocols, et cetera, writing protocols. Couple topics we really can't ask. We can't talk about individual company pipelines. We can't talk about vendors, good, bad, et cetera. We will stay focused on the solutions. So please don't ask anything specific around vendors or cost and which member companies are using which solutions. We really are here just to try to bring information that might benefit everyone. On the next slide, I'll introduce you to our panelists for today. Again, we're excited to have folks representing 3 different organizations, more than that if you count all the hats that they're wearing. We have Hugh Glover, who is the technical director for the HL7 Vulcan Accelerator. We have Chris Decker, who was kind enough to do our recording background piece in the recording. Chris is president and CEO of CDISC. Dave Iberson-Hurst is the CDISC Unified Study Definition Model, USDM, product owner, and Dave has done a lot of the heavy lifting around the testing. And Lynn Mercado, who is the global head of protocol delivery and U.S. head regulatory writing submissions for Novartis, and she is also a representative of Transcelerate and works in the protocol digitization space. So those are our panelists. They'll all be on for questions later. For now, I'm going to turn it over to Hugh and Dave to walk us through the January Connectathon, where again the focus was around digitizing the schedule of activities.
Thank you, Stacy. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk through a little bit of the background of the UDP project as a whole. I will talk a little bit about the journey we've been on with the Connectathons, exactly what a Connectathon is, and take us through to the most recent Connectathon in January. And then I'm going to hand over to Dave, who will give his view on those Connectathons, and then actually the most exciting part of it. And everybody has their fingers crossed for for demos as ever, but take us through into actually doing a live demo of where we've got to so far. So the best way of getting your background on the UDP project is to go and follow the link that came with the registration. Watch the video that was in there. You'll get a much deeper dive into exactly what goes on and how we got to where we are today. But I just wanted to summarize the very key points out of this. So about 18 months ago, Vulcan was asked by ICH to provide a technical implementation guide in Fire for the work they were doing on a digital protocol, so the M11 C#. So we have ICH as an organization providing a number of very specific inputs. At the same time, we've got CDISC and Transcelerate working against that template and technical spec to produce the USDM and associated terminology that will support all of that content. This effectively is an information model that supports the content of ICH M11, but also provides a much greater degree of granularity in some areas. Vulcan could see that there was far more opportunity for utilization of a digital protocol than just the base use case that ICH had, which was for the transmission of a protocol from a sponsor to a regulator. And what we are now doing is making use of what all the other parties are doing to provide implementation guides on how you would resolve business problems if you'd got a digital protocol to work with. So this gives a complicated timeline. If we go to the next slide, please. And I'm not going to go through all of the rows of this timeline. Go to the recording if you want to go into that level of detail. What I'm really focusing on is the very bottom layers, the Vulcan layers for the implementation guide, the webinar, and the Connectathons. But you can see from the purple layers at the top down through the M2 and the CDISC layers that there's a lot of coordination of different moving parts within this project as a whole. One of the strengths of the HL7 approach to things is running a Connectathon. So let's go to the next slide, please. And if you've not been to a Connectathon, I do recommend that you try and attend one at some point, because it's not something that's easy to really convey the depth of understanding you can get just by talking about it. You need to have been there to really experience it. What you typically have is a room with somewhere between 300 and 500 people. They're all scattered around tables, and there are something like 40 different tracks running. So each table has got maybe a dozen people, and they're working on a specific problem and how you would resolve that problem using Fire and using an implementation guide for that particular thing to fix it. So it's all about working with the Fire standard, working with the implementation guides, but actually taking sample data and having test systems and seeing that things work. And the beauty of it is that when things don't work, as inevitably is the case, you've got the people there either around the table or somewhere in the room who will know the answer to why it doesn't work. And you can make a lot of very rapid progress like that. So let's go forward another couple of slides. So within the systems that we use across all of our Connectathons, we have this sort of broad structure. So we have got some sources of data. We've currently got about 6 different protocols which have been put into M11 format. So that's following the M11 headings and the sections within those headings. That's a manual process of putting them into that format and then entering those into the USDM tool or some intermediate tool which will put them into some machine readable form. From there, you convert those into Fire, and then they go to a Fire server. So the point here is that you've got a set of custom tools in the middle, and those custom tools will work with whatever they choose to work with, but they all communicate out to a single Fire server, and they all communicate out using the same Fire standard. And as a result, you get interchange between systems. So something can come into the top Excel tool, go into the Fire server, come back out to the M11 report tool. And also, because it's in a Fire server, you can look at the contents of things that are in there through a fairly standard viewer, which allows you to see Fire content without having to go to an enormous amount of work to get something that is specific to a protocol. So all our systems through the Connectathons have followed the same path. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the first of our Connectathons was in May last year, and we were looking really at the original idea, which was document transfer. We don't pretend for a moment that as we go forwards, people handing around protocols in document form is going to go away. There are small companies, there are small regulators around the world. There is different speed at which people can implement things. We cannot lose sight of the human readable form of the protocol. So it may not physically be on a sheet of paper, but it's still being put into an electronic document format in a form that we would instantly recognize. So in May, what we were demonstrating was the practicality of actually moving a document in the M11 format from one system to another. And if you go to the next slide, please, I'm actually going to go just a little bit into the technicalities of the way this is working. So within Fire, there are a number of different resources, ways of representing particular sets of data. Within those, you can actually have what are called profiles of particular sets of data organization. And one of those was a thing called the M11 report profile. And in the red box is a much simplified summary of the contents of that structure. And there are many, many more that I've not put onto this. So you can see that what you've got in there is an identifier set of information, a title set of information, and then you've got a nested set of sections. Each of those sections then has a block of text under a particular heading. So the document structure that we're thinking about does fall very easily into that Fire format where you're handing text around according to a set of established headings. So we're putting the outline M11 structure onto that without necessarily going into each and every variable that you might want to deal with in there. If you go forward to the next slide, please. We then came to the next Connectathon, which was in September. And in that one, we wanted to look at the detail of some areas of the protocol. And if we go forward again to the next slide. And what we were doing in this is using an additional set of FHIR resources. So we were using the research study resource. So now we have got something which identifies a research study. It's got a set of metadata around it about the version, the title, the short form of that. It's got an entry in there for protocol, and we'll come back to that in a minute. It's got organizations tied to it. It's got groups tied to it. And organizations can then be used to represent the sponsor. The groups can be used to represent the eligibility criteria. So what we have here is a structure which allows us to deal with a lot more granularity in the data than we would have otherwise. Go forward to the next slide. So we now get to, excuse me, we now get to January, to Connectathon we have just had. And we're now bringing in a third element. Within Vulcan, over the initial project periods for Vulcan, the first 2 years, one of our topics that we worked at was the schedule of activities. And we published an implementation guide specifically for schedule of activities. And this, of course, was done before the ICH M11 work was done. So our question for January was, can we take this existing schedule of activities implementation guide and make use of that within the structures that we've been looking at in the 2 previous Connectathons that look at things as a document and look at them to some extent in a granular form. So if we go forward to the next slide, we had some specific and in a way very simple objectives. Can we create a study with the schedule activities under that M11 format? And when we've created it, can we display it? And if we go forward to the next slide, we're now working with a slightly simpler form of the overall data flow. So we still have the same set of sample data. We've still got the web tools, and we're going to get a demonstration of some of this in a minute. We're still passing it through into a FHIR server. We're still pulling it out and looking at it within the browser. So we've used the same set of tooling, evolving, yes, but the same set of tooling for all of these Connectathons that we have worked through. Go forward to the next slide, please. The structures that we are now working with, so we're working predominantly with a research study. We're now bringing in an additional resource, so the plan definition, and that plan definition is the representation of the schedule of activities built according to the schedule of activities implementation guide done by Vulcan. So what we've got here is something now which is pulling on existing work and tying it all together into a higher level structure, which is quite granular. And while we didn't specifically work on the document side in January, we've not lost that part of the document. So the work that we did through that pulled up one interesting distinction. And if we go forward to, actually go forward to the next slide again, please. When we think about the way we structure data, if you're passing something to someone to approve it and say, yes, that is the formal version of it, you really want everything in one single package. So a monolithic structure that's got your research study, it's got your plan definition, all those resources that we were looking at earlier, all bound together within the one envelope, if you like. But if you're going to take that data and you're going to tie that into the execution of a study, for instance, you may well want each of those items to be separately dealt with so that you've got your plan definition as something you can refer back to. You've got your your sponsor, represented by an organization, that you're going to put into your data once. You're not going to repeat it multiple times. So we have got this distinction between something which is a single document, if you like, in a single envelope, and a number of different documents that can be taken out of the envelope one at a time and put back in again afterwards, to enable us to work with a degree more granularity. We will be looking at the different use cases, the different business problems that we are trying to deal with, and thinking about which of these patterns fits best with each of those models. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dave now. So Dave, I'll let you talk your way through it and do the demo.
Right, thanks Hugh. If we can go to the next slide. Just a little sort of fill in the story that Hugh's been giving about the previous connectathons and all that sort of stuff. This is a slide from we did for the Atlanta Connectathon back in September. As you can see, top left, we were taking M11 protocols, we were reading those in, we were putting them into this thing called USDM, this Unified Study Definitions Model. This is the sort of persistent storage layer. And then when we decided to click on the right button, take that structured information, put it into the message, the file message, send it to a server, which is sort of represented by that Vulcan circle in the middle. And then Rick Smithy, who has produced the other sort of application, the fire viewer, he could then go and see what was on the server, take those sets of resources and display it. And as Hugh said, this was very much the protocol document to the regulator view of the world. So, and first connectathon we did in Dallas was very much sort of very much a document perspective. When we got to Atlanta, we were starting to structure, as it says there, the title page, inclusion, exclusion, estimates, objectives, endpoints. And we got round to a little bit on amendments, but we didn't quite finish that piece, but we got to a sufficient level. But of course, we're dealing with a source document. And this is the problem. We're working from a document world, and a fire message is very much a structured entity. So we need to sort of read the document in, structure it, and then send it in a message, and we're using USDM for that process. The other thing to emphasize is we want this seamless transition from the human readable world, dashboards, the M11 document, into a computer, and be able to then communicate that structured information to whoever needs it, and using fire messages to do that communication. And we want all those pieces to fit sort of hand in glove, all nicely together. Okay, so next slide. So you'll notice this next slide when it appears, and as with everything, there we go. All demos and things, you're always waiting for something to go wrong. I've just built this slide to show what we did in the virtual connectathon that he was talking about, and it's pretty much the same backdrop, but you'll notice a little green bit has appeared over on the left hand side. Participants are slightly different, we've got the same viewer, but you'll notice it's sort of the use case is slightly changed. We've got sponsor, we've still got number 2 regulator, but now we've got operational environment, because the SoA can be used by a lot of people. It could be used by the regulator, but it could be used by a lot of other people. EDC systems, electronic health record system, all this, the use cases are subtly different here, because we're using this SoA message rather than the M11 message. This is the purpose of this connectathon. But going back to the green bit, and you'll see this again on the next slide. The problem with a document is that the SoA is in the document, but it can come in a variety of forms. We see images, we see tables. And it isn't consistent today. And you'll see on the next slide that M11 isn't specifying to us exactly what an SoA should look like. So we have to decode it. We have to find a way of getting that information in. And what we've been doing in the past with USDM is we've been doing that using a sort of manual process, decomposing the SoA, putting it into Excel spreadsheet, and then loading that. So for this connectathon, that provided as an easy route to generate the structured data we needed then to fill. What we want to do, obviously longer term, is close that gap between having to do it by hand and having an automatic method of doing it from the protocol document. There's a few ways we can solve that problem. But for the connectathon, we just needed the structured data. So that was the reason for the Excel, and we'll demo these in a minute. Again, we send it to a server. The server can then be accessed via the other applications, pulled from the server, and it was being displayed. So that's the world we're in for the connectathon. We're sort of focused on here, the virtual connectathon back in January. SoA rather than the document as a whole. But you heard Hugh talk about research study, this resource, and if you're not familiar with them, join the club because it's quite a new world to me and all the rest of it. But we use the research study resource both in transporting the M11 message and with the SoA. It's effectively the sort of top level. It's the header. Fun enough, it's called research study. It's what you'd expect. And so what we have is the connection between these two connectathons. The research study is the sort of root of both of them. And that's how the sort of M11 and the SoA can be joined in the future. And it's basically what we're trying to do is close that gap so it becomes more one thing rather than sort of two separate things in the future. And the research study is the start of that work and the glue which joins them together currently logically at the moment. So next slide, please. I'm just conscious of the time as well. I'm not sure exactly how long we've got, but just one final slide. So M11, as I say, doesn't structure the SoA. We need structure for data exchange, and so therefore that's why we're using the Excel as a sort of stopgap. SoAs comes in many formats. We've across sponsors at the moment. M11 is now bringing uniformity to that. But the SoAs, we see a variety, footnotes, all this sort of thing. But the connectathon, first successful bridging of the gap, getting the SoA into the file message, and it demonstrated that USDM and the file representation are fitting together quite nicely. The big picture you see to the right-hand side is a sort of an info sheet I put together to sort of work out how all the resources in the file world and the USDM, which is the sort of green circles and the shading on top, how the resources overlaid onto the USDM model. And it was me working out how to sort of build the SoA message. And we need to work on taking that paper SoA into USDM to make it easy for users and all that sort of thing, all the rest of it. The schedule of activities excerpt there is the depth of the extent of the M11 document and the specification, M11 telling us what we need to put in various sections. And as you can see, it just says a tabular format is recommended, but it's not specifying it any further. So what we need to do is work out how do we take something which can be quite variable and get it into internal machine structures so that we can transmit these messages successfully. And that's what I mean by closing the gap. We need to change it from a manual process into an automated process, and that's what we want to get to next. And we're working on that now and think we've got some good ideas about how we can do that. Right, I need to take the screen share. So somebody hopefully is going to give me the screen share. We're now entering very dodgy territory because now we're going into demonstration mode and things can go wrong. We've got a Fire server. It's a little bit, everything we're running on is test software. Let's first point that out. You know, we're not using very powerful servers, all this sort of thing. This is purely for testing purposes, and so therefore sometimes we get timeouts, this type of thing. Hopefully we won't see any today. What you're looking at is, I've also got over here, just behind, is that picture that you were seeing earlier. Let me get rid of this horrible thing here. Go away. Thank you. This is the picture you've just seen. I'm just going to say what you're going to look at first is the bit here where we're actually loading these protocols, loading this Excel, and I'll demonstrate that. Then we'll demonstrate putting it onto the server. This is the server, and then we'll demonstrate pulling it from the server and displaying it over here. So that's what we're going to do. So that's just to give you the context. So this is the how do I read it side of things. I've got one thing. What I'm going to do is what we did in the first two Connectathons, which is load an M11 document, just to show you that, to give you the sort of context. And I'm going to pick the Radvax example, and I load it. So this is reading in a Word document, structuring it, putting it into USDM. Nothing more at the moment, just getting it into USDM ready for what we want to do. Go back, and now we've got a second, as you can see, M11 document. I can look at that beast. And what I'm doing is because I've got an M11 document, I'm able to go, I know where the overall design is. I know where the trial schema is because it's in section X, section Y. I can pick them out. You'll notice I haven't displayed deliberately the schedule activities, and I'm going to implement that feature. But I can look at the schedule of activities by going to the protocol because I know that it's towards the top. And I can go and look at that protocol, and hopefully I start to see it down here. Hold on. Let's just look at this one because I know this one's got it in the top of the document. I should have looked at the right one, I'm pretty sure. There we go. We're getting the schedule of activities there. Okay. But you can see it's just an image. It might be a table. It can be all sorts of things. But that's what we were doing. And what we can do as part of this is we can transmit that. And what we were doing, we're using, I just left the Dallas first version that we did on the original version because we've been using that format for other purposes. But I could transmit that. You can see to some servers, and I lovingly call the server we're using the Hugh server, or a local test server. We can transmit it, we can export it, in various formats in JSON. But for this one, we wanted SoA. So what I was going to do was import, and I'm going to import my Excel. So what I'm going to do is go and pick up my Excel file, and I'm just going to use one of these publicly available from ct.dev that we've got. I'm picking up Excel and I'm loading in a set of images. It's just got the study design as an image. That's why I'm loading a few files. So we can load those. That's now loaded. And I can load those, view those details. Now, because it's all structured, I've been slowly building these screens to mimic the other ones which are taken from the M11 document, but I haven't got round to sort of doing that work. But you'll notice over here, schedule of activities. I can now view that, and I can bring out from all the structured data a presentation of the structured data back into an SoA looking style. Most people will recognize that as an SoA. And what we can do now is transmit that. And this is where I hold my breath and I just go transmit. And I look at my things and it's sending it off to the server. And this is where I cross my fingers, as I say, and we hope that everything works. I'm looking at my console log over here and things like that. Either I get a red message at the top or I get a green message saying it's been accepted by the server. Server takes a little bit of time because it's a big package of data. And there we go. And I breathe a sigh of relief. And what I want is this bit here. This is my reference. And what I'm going to do is just cut and paste that. Oh, have I got a space at the front? Let's just make sure I haven't got a space at the front. Cut and paste that. It's gone to this, it's now on this server. This is the Farley server, just a nice front page of it. But what I'm going to do is go over here and I'm going to pick one of these and I'm going to go put that ID in and display the data. And this takes a little while as well. It takes a little bit of a while to sort of bring it all down, all the rest of it. And this is Rick software. And I want to say thank you to Rick Smithies and also Jeff Lowe. They've been great in, sort of navigating all the file world and all the rest of it. And I now breathe a sigh of relief because there is my SoA displayed by another application, bringing the structured data out. And if you look at the JSON, it doesn't look like an SoA at all. But now it does. And basically, if I flip very quickly, you can see two different applications, but basically putting it into the same form from the structured data. USDM, fire message, display back as an SoA down the line. There are one or two things. If you look back at the video, you'll notice this is all alphabetical order, and this isn't. This is as per the protocol. One or two little fine frills like this we need to solve, but solvable, eminently solvable, no problems whatsoever. So that's the demo. That's it working. What you've seen is document, protocol document, SoA. We've had to structure it by hand a little bit, but we'll solve that and get it directly from the protocol. M11 bringing us power, USDM, fire messages over to the other side and displayed. I will hand back to, I think, Mary Lynn, who will take you onto the sort of more businessy side of the whole thing. Thank you, Mary Lynn, and I'll turn myself off.
Thanks so much, Dave, and thanks for showing us sort of what's possible. I am going to bring it a little bit back to the business side. So the schedule of activities, hold on, let me just hide everyone. I can't seem to see the slides. I'm so sorry. How do I?
1 second.
When you do a live demo, there's always some technical challenge. I think Dave got off easy, so I think getting the slides back up is now our technical challenge. Thanks for your patience, Mary Lynn and everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Dave showed what's possible in the realm of a digital protocol, and now I'll sort of talk through the business challenges and maybe some of the challenges of a paper schedule of activities, and therefore why a digital protocol is really important and powerful. So the schedule of activities in the protocol is really important because it serves as a roadmap for the entire clinical trial, providing that visual representation of when each study, procedure, or assessment should take place, and then also ideally how each study, procedure, or assessment should be executed. The SoA is also really the hardest part of the protocol to present on paper because it needs to present a sufficient level of detail while also being really clear, easy to follow, and not overly prescriptive so as to avoid unnecessary protocol amendments. It also needs to account for various participant scenarios that may or may not happen during the course of the trial, and the SoA also needs to align with all of the corresponding information presented across the entire rest of the protocol. The SoA is also difficult to get right on paper because it is one representation that's being used by multiple stakeholders for multiple purposes. From the perspective, for example, of a patient, the SoA should ideally be able to answer the questions: where are my appointments? What tests will I be undergoing? Do I need to fast before each of my blood draws? And what questionnaires will I have to fill out? From the perspective of a site, the SoA should ideally be able to answer the questions: does my site have the infrastructure to conduct this study? What data needs to be collected and how does it need to be coded? Is the study feasible for my patient? And also, how do I schedule my staff and my patients? From a sponsor's perspective, the SoA should ideally be able to answer whether the data being collected from the planned procedures and assessments are sufficient to answer that sponsor's clinical question of interest. Also enable the assessment of the level of burden on the patient and on the site, and enable the calculation of cost. Finally, from the perspective of a regulator, the SoA should ideally be able to demonstrate that the procedures support the study objectives and also be able to assess and trace compliance. Since it's virtually impossible for a schedule of activities on paper to be able to answer each of these questions while also still being readable and clear, the additional information that each of these stakeholders on this slide are interested in obtaining is obtained by manually processing, translating, transcribing, and elaborating on what is presented in the SoA. Next slide, please. So what is the solution? The solution is a digitized schedule of activities that's built in a structured way, electronically represented in USDM. A digitized schedule of activities eliminates those limits that are imposed by having to present it on paper and eliminates the need to manually adjust and expand on the information that's contained within it. So a digitized schedule of assessments can act as a single source of truth as well, which minimizes errors. Using the analogy of nesting dolls, a digital protocol can contain many layers of detail, with each layer serving a specific purpose and able to answer each of the questions posed by the multiple stakeholders. So where we're starting today in the bottom left is a flat paper-based schedule of activities that's located in a particular section of a paper protocol document, and this SoA can be screenshotted or copied and pasted into another document. A digitized SoA enables the sponsor to provide the details surrounding each procedure and assessment in the bottom middle. And these are details that are commonly found in footnotes today. And digitizing it enables one to present that information in a structured, contextualized, machine readable, and machine exchangeable way. For example, in the bottom right, a procedure can be linked to its corresponding endpoint, its expected timing, and its appropriate medical code conversion. Next slide. So taking you through another analogy, in the middle of this slide is an iceberg, and what's shown above the surface of the water are the capabilities of a digitized protocol that we've been able to realize and demonstrate to date. So we've been able to streamline document creation by developing standardized templates for protocols and also enabling the automated population of specific fields in downstream documents using metadata. And this results in reduced potential for error, improved collaboration on the document, version control, as well as time savings. We've also been able to demonstrate secure and compliant transmission of a digital protocol to a health authority, and this enables customized views and stakeholder-specific interrogation of the information contained within the protocol, as well as a rapid communication and feedback loop. Under the surface of the water are additional opportunities that can be realized by a digitized protocol within the spaces of efficiency, automation, and analytics. For instance, structured, contextualized, machine-readable patient population information would allow for more automated patient matching, site selection, and tracking of recruitment across sites. A digitized schedule of activities with structured detail around its visits, procedures, and assessments would enable accelerated costing activities, site-specific resource allocation, and scenario modeling to be able to predict the financial impact, say, of an amendment to the study design. Digitization also would reduce the need to translate and interpret the schedule of activities at the site and can enable alignment and interoperability with electronic health record systems. Next slide. It's trying. There it goes. So each use case that I've mentioned on previous slides is unique, and each has its own build requirements and its own associated complexities. For example, using a digitized protocol with to enable alignment with electronic health record systems, or automated recruitment insights, or streamlined budgeting and forecasting capabilities can't happen overnight. Multiple process steps do need to be performed in order to establish a digital protocol as a solution. And these steps look slightly different for each of the pain points that your business would like to address. So first, as a first step, one needs to identify their particular challenge or process gap that they would like to tackle. And it doesn't have to be big. You don't have to boil the ocean. Next, one has to research and identify the requirements for the digital protocol that they need for that particular use case. The system that's designed needs to be able to support the protocol across the requisite internal platforms, as well as ensure interoperability across the external requisite platforms. And finally, the process for deploying the digital protocol needs to be defined. And the process should also ensure a relatively positive user experience. While the path isn't easy, much of the hard work aligning that protocol with regulations and developing a protocol structure and standard terminology has been done by the hard work and efforts performed by Transcelerate, CDISC, ICH, and Vulcan. Next slide. And in addition to the technical work that Hugh and Dave demonstrated to us that was performed at the January Vulcan UDP Connectathon, discussions also took place to better understand the business challenges that are experienced by the different stakeholders. And the outcomes of these discussions about the business challenges help us better understand how processes may evolve in the future, but also help inform those technical requirements for the digital protocol. So from a study design perspective, one key challenge is the fact that today's document-based protocol needs to walk that line between clarity and detail, and therefore doesn't include that granularity that's required for site conduct, such as coding requirements. From a study execution perspective, ensuring interoperability of the protocol between the sponsor and the site is a manual process today, and it's often also a site-specific process and needs to be customized for each site. From a reporting and review standpoint, there's a need to compare standards and an opportunity to reduce what's open to interpretation among existing standards. To begin to address some of these challenges, the Vulcan UDP project has developed a catalog of sample protocols for digitization use cases, including ones with detailed data. UDP Vulcan is testing workflows to identify ways to refine processes and enable interoperability. And then the project is also creating structured implementation guides as tools, and these implementation guides enable unambiguous and therefore accurate message exchange. Next slide. So what's next? Next steps for the Vulcan UDP project include researching and identifying additional business requirements to inform the technical design, preparing for balloting in August, planning for additional use cases, and also getting ready for the next Connectathon in Madrid in May. Specific focus areas will include exploring the digital exchange of inclusion-exclusion criteria information, ensuring connectivity and cohesivity across past Connectathon outputs, exploring different approaches to structuring and exchanging protocol data, enhancing the mapping between USDM and FHIR, and checking the alignment of terminology across M11, USDM, and FHIR, and finally exploring the use of FHIR extensions and profiles for new additional use cases. Next slide. And there are a lot of resources that are available to you on the Vulcan, Transcelerate, CDISC, and ICH websites to help you along your digital protocol journey. And these links are all provided in your handout. So please watch the videos, sign up for upcoming events and presentations, and utilize the standards, tools, and templates that have been developed and made available to you by these organizations. And please continue to stay involved. Thank you very much. And now I think Stacy will take us through some polling.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mary Lynn. Thank you to all the speakers. I'd like to invite you back on camera. We're going to actually take some, we do have a few poll questions, but we've had some good questions come in from our attendees today. So I want to address those. Reminder to everyone on the call, you can put additional questions into the questions box. We just can't answer things about specific vendors, specific costs, who's using what. Again, we're trying to share information that might benefit all to the extent possible. And if I can ask us to flip back to the timeline slide, which is, I believe, slide 9 in the set. And I know our display may take a bit. So while we get back there, we've had a few questions come in about the timeline, about the interdependency between some of the work being done across multiple organizations and around the solutions being produced. So first, I'm going to just share with folks that this is a joint timeline that we have developed across all organizations. We have routine check-ins with ICH, Vulcan, Transcelerate, CDISC, where we're staying aligned so we can look for those interdependencies. Maybe a little bit, we'll go a little bit top to bottom, starting with the ICH components. Mary Lynn, do you want to speak to what solutions are being produced by ICH M11 and what their intended, high-level purposes? What's the value of the solutions coming out of M11?
Absolutely. So ICH M11 has sort of three initial deliverables, and the plan is for each of these deliverables to reach step 4 of the ICH platform by the fourth quarter of this year. The first deliverable is a high-level guideline, so it's maybe a 3 or 4 pager that provides background about the harmonized protocol template and technical specification, some of the high-level use cases, and also some of the basic design principles that were taken into account when designing the tools. The second deliverable is the globally harmonized protocol template, and this was built um, through consensus and collaboration with global regulators and global representatives of trade organizations. And it provides that sort of header and content structure that's expected for a clinical trial protocol that is submitted to a regulatory authority. And it has all of the mandatory sections across sort of efficacy, benefit, risk, safety. And it is a paper document. But the next deliverable is the technical specification that provides the data elements, the definitions of these data elements, and the valid value lists. And so it takes us a step further into being able to provide a set of instructions to structure the data contained within the protocol template. Next to come will be a FHIR implementation guide that also enables that sort of machine exchange.
Great. Thank you, Mary Lynn. Chris, I'm going to come to you next. So as part of the relationship that we have through this project, CDISC has an MOU with ICH. Vulcan has a close relationship with ICH. We have seen previews of all of those deliverables, including some in-flight adjustments. We feel that they're nearly stable. Can you talk, Chris, about what deliverables are coming from CDISC that CDISC will own and do own now and going forward that complement ICH M11?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of glad I didn't get, I'm the only one here who didn't have to present. So this was easy for me today. But yeah, let me go over sort of the CDISC deliverables specifically. We obviously have talked a lot on this call about the USDM model, and this is the Unified Study Definition model, and we're releasing a phase 4 very shortly this spring, which really focuses on refinement rather than new content. So as we went through the first 3 releases, we evolved it, right? Over time, as you know, with any model or any technology, you evolve it to the point where it's robust. And we did land into a robust version of it earlier this year, but we're just continuing to refine that, making sure that we pay attention to backward compatibility. So as technology vendors start to implement this, we need to balance that as they implement it in their systems. So the other piece is around conformance rules. So we want to make sure through our CDISC Open Rules initiative in terms of building machine executable rules, that we actually build conformance rules around USDM. So if you're actually using the model, you can, in your content, you can run it against these rules as we go forward. And finally, tying it back to ICH M11, as Stacy alluded to, last summer we signed an MOU with ICH where we manage the terminology around the M11 initiative. And so last fall we developed that terminology. We went to the ICH meeting and resolved a lot of the comments and questions that came in about that terminology. So that will come along with the delivery of the ICH M11 effort, is terminology which will be stored and managed within the CDISC terminology library. So as we do that, I'll tie that back also to USDM. One of the things in phase 4 we're making sure is that we're aligned and harmonized with that template and that protocol. Now, you're asking, it's not done, right? No, it's not, but we'll continue to harmonize with that. So that is one of our priorities as we move forward in the next release, is to always keep closely tied to what M11 is coming out with and to make sure it's harmonized.
Thank you, Chris. Hugh, now we'll turn to you and Vulcan, and can you speak of what deliverables, what solutions will be coming out of Vulcan and how they relate?
Yeah, sure. So the immediate deliverable that you'll see coming from Vulcan will be the first draft of the implementation guide. The guide itself will evolve over a period of time, and we aim to have a first rough copy of this in probably by about the end of April. And the objective there is to have something we can show to people and ask, does this tell you what you need to know in order to start implementing stuff? And I have no doubt that people will find things that we haven't done, things that we haven't thought of, ways of using it that we haven't thought of, and we can go back and add those in at that point. Our formal timeline is that we have to have things ready for a ballot. So that's the approval process within HL7. And our content has got to be ready for that ballot by the middle of July. The ballot itself opens at the beginning of August, closes at the beginning of September, and we will then start on the process of looking at the ballot comments and refinement. So we've got a lot of work to do during the course of this year, but it is work that will run in cycles. And I think an analogy for all of this work here is not to use the usual one of thinking of a building and you've got to have good foundations and then you build the walls and then you put the windows in, because that's very sequential. I think this is more like people who do sculptures using a tree trunk and a chainsaw. And you start with a tree trunk and you cut away a whole set of bits, and after a while you get something that kind of looks like an owl, but it's not perfect yet. And you keep working at that. But you can't wait until the last moment and produce a finished, polished owl all in one go. You've actually got to do all the rough cuts first. And that's what we're doing here. We're all building different rough cuts and refining them so that we will get something that will be implementable much faster than we might otherwise do.
Thanks, Hugh. I think that sums it up very well, and the importance of collaboration across these organizations. It allows, when we think about the expertise across the industry, it allows folks to concentrate on a very specific piece. But through our collaboration, tying them together so that each is continuing to build and we are continuing to grow towards the same end goal. Thinking ahead, right, as we start to implement, and some companies have already started to use the M11 template that's available, the draft one at risk. Some have started to implement USDM. Some have started to utilize FHIR. Everyone is also proceeding in their implementations in different staggered ways. Think about directionally where we're headed. Dave, I'm going to ask you perhaps to comment on two aspects, if you will, thinking of where we are going with this. Can you speak to how the biomedical concepts would fit in here? That would be question one. And actually, I'll come back with my second question. It may be a little disjointed. So can you help us with biomedical concepts, how those might apply in the SoA?
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar with biomedical concepts, they're observational groupings. They're groupings of variables which sort of form an observation, something which is meaningful in the real world. USDM allows us to attach those to the activities within what we think of today as the SoA, to start meeting some of the use cases that Mary Lynn was talking about. The different views, we want all this type of functionality that we want to get from an electronic protocol. We have those built into USDM. So we have that extra layer of detail. So think of that slide which Mary Lynn showed of the Russian dolls. With an existing protocol, we have one layer. Within USDM, we can have all these layers behind with the extra information of procedures, biomedical concepts, the observations which we need. And then obviously when we go into the fire world, the SoA message has slots, for functionality to handle the equivalent layer of information as it flows into the sort of EHR world or the fire world. And we can transport those across, and they can then be used to assist sites and what have you to meet the needs of those users. So yes, we have that extra layer of information. We have procedure information as well.
Thank you, Dave. Can you talk, my other question that came in was around how the SoA could be displayed in different ways. Can the metadata be utilized to drive different displays for different viewpoints? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so there was a question. It says, when the SoA moves to the server and display, can you use the metadata to customize the display? There's one very important thing to realize, and Mary Lynn touched on this. It's the 2D nature of the piece of paper, the limitations that piece of paper brings to the amount of information you can convey and the way you can convey it, and all the complexity behind that information, which is why we see footnotes. Yes, but if, and if, or if this condition, it can get very complex. The USDM model doesn't model an SoA. It models the logic of a study design, and that's why USDM study definition, it has the detail of the study definition. It can be brought out and presented as an SoA, but it can be filtered and rendered in many different ways. It could be a subject view, it could be a site view, it could be displayed as a flowchart for the site. And 26, I think Hugh said, and all the use cases we haven't thought of, all the other things we want to do with it. So we have the ability to do all of these things to display it. So it's stored as a representation of the study design. We display it, and we displayed it today in a traditional SoA because that's what people expect to see, and it means something to them today, but it doesn't necessarily have to be displayed that way.
Thank you. We have a few polls we would like to get folks' opinions on and inputs on. So the first one, we're going to run our first poll now. And this question goes out to our audience. What is the biggest challenge your organization faces in adopting digital protocol standards? So I think it's helpful. Sometimes we feel like our challenges are unique and extra hard, and it's helpful to see what challenges others are facing at the same time. Okay. Thank you all for participating in the poll. And just a note that for anyone attending who has registered for this webinar, you will be getting a follow-on email with a recording, so you can go back and look at this in more details. If we want to share the polling results with the audience, we have a few choices here, and it looks like the one that hits the chord with the most folks is the technical integration with existing systems at 43% of our attendees. Then we have a close tie between understanding and interpreting M11 and USDM, and the lack of skilled personnel and resources, both around low 20%, and a lower percentages around the regulatory uncertainties and cost concerns. Mary Lynn, because you sit at a pharma company and have that sponsor perspective, can you maybe speak a little bit to what some of the challenges are?
Absolutely. I think, coming from a very large, complex organization that's a little bit unwieldy, I know it can feel daunting. I think in one of my slides, I mentioned, you don't need to boil the ocean. You can sort of take that first step. I think having the tools that we currently have at our disposal, the ICH M11 template, USDM, and also I think the available resources. Like, this is such a rich community, the Vulcan UDP, Transcelerate, CDISC communities. And, you know, I attended a Connectathon in Atlanta, and I am not from the tech world, but I learned so much. So I think, you know, don't boil the ocean, take that first step, utilize the tools that are available, and also utilize the communities that are available. And, you know, it doesn't need to be big. It can be a small pain point that you're trying to address, and just take that first step, try it out. If it barely works, that's okay. You know, sort of where to go and what you need to do to help move it along.
Thanks, Mary Lynn. I'm going to go to poll question number 3. I'm going to mix the order up a little bit. Oh, no, if we can, John, if you don't mind, if we can go to number 3. Thank you. So Mary Lynn was just commenting on the implementation, and sometimes the hurdle around starting is the knowledge, or at least the perception of, do we have the right knowledge? So would an introductory video around FHIR specific to protocol development be valuable in your organization? While the responses are coming in, Hugh, I don't know if you want to comment on some of the educational resources.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, HL7 has got a whole range of resources, both pre-recorded videos and also more formal training sessions, workgroup meetings, and run remotely during the course of the year. One thing I think that people will find is most of those use the general patient care, so EHR focused examples as the base illustration of it. And part of our motivation for the current question was whether it will be helpful to do some of the same material, but targeting protocol development and using those as illustrations instead. I think the results speak very clearly that does seem to be something people would find useful.
Thank you, Hugh. All right, now we can go back to the second poll question. You might have seen it flip on your screen. You can't have a presentation, I think, these days without talking about AI. So we have a polling question, number 2 on the list here, but number 3 to you all. Do you think AI, machine learning, or natural language processing will play a role in the structuring and implementing of digital protocols in the future? So, for me, I'm not seeing the poll yet, but it's possible. It's just on my end.
I can't open it.
You can't open it. Okay. Well, I think, folks, if I'm going to turn this over to some of our presenters, maybe Chris, I'll go to you first to just give some commentary around the future of implementing digital protocols, and where is AI going to play into this?
Yeah, and I'd love others to chime in as well. It's funny that the one tech poll we can't get up, that's AI. It's just interesting. But anyway, last week I attended SCOPE, which is the Summit for Clinical Operation Executives, as well as I think Mary Lynn and Stacy were there as well. What was interesting is there was a lot of AI presentations, and there was a lot of work being done in companies with a focus around documents. Like, how do we generate documents? How do we accelerate that generation of that content? And what a lot of them said during those presentations, at least what I took in, is that yes, they've been able to make significant progress, but it'd be better if we had better data, right? That was a common theme that I heard in those presentations. So as you look at the information with USDM and standardizing this structure and this content, that only helps this process as we move forward. And what was also interesting is that there were several presentations that were given on folks that are looking at digital protocol and actually implementing within their organization. So I'm always I always chuckle and find it funny when you walk into a conference and they present on something and you're like, oh wow, somebody's using this and we didn't even know about it. So it was kind of interesting to watch that as well. But back to the AI, it was a lot about we need better data and better information so that we can really leverage and continue to accelerate the AI. So I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in.
Yeah, I think Dave, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, there's just two aspects of the AI side. There's the sort of at the front end, getting protocols in, especially maybe old protocols where you want to use AI to sort of to get the information out of protocols. We're doing some work, and this is why I talked about closing the gap. We're doing some work specifically around the SoA because tables are hard to read and they come in so many different shapes and forms, getting those into USDM. And then, as Chris said, at the end, if you have a really good solid foundation of a study definition and the data, data and its context together, then your AI can really gain benefit from that solid set of data, because the data is just not there on its own. It has the context and it's linked to that data as well, and that can bring, and of course across multiple studies, that could bring great power.
Thank you. Well, I know we are now at time. I did just want to give a final a shout out to folks to go look at some of the resources that are available. A handout that is attached, or you can look at the recording. The Connectathon coming up in Madrid in May will be quite exciting. I think it is the culmination of a lot of the work that has come to date. But Hugh's analogy around the tree and the owl will hold true. This collaboration across the initiatives and shared today will continue. And that's where we'll really start to learn more from implementation and bring it back. It's the governance of these things as we go forward. And that this project has allowed us, I think, to put some foundational connections in place. So thank you to the presenters for your session today. Thank you to all who attended, and please feel free to share the recording and the resources out with your colleagues. Thank you, everyone.